Bundy?
Detective Thompson, you say you knew Theodore Robert Bundy on August 16, 1975?
Around that time I was acquainted with it, yes, sir.
Around that time?
Yes.
On that date? You say for
I'm
sure?
not positive on the date.
Well, you give me the benefit of your best estimate as to when you first...
The first conversation that I had with you was August the 21st, outside the Salt Lake County Jail. That I'm positive of.
You ever met me prior to that?
No, sir.
I'd like to.
That's all, thank you.
May this officer be excused?
Yes, sir.
I think you're free to go.
That's all I have on the motion, Judge.
You have witnesses on the motion?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Harvey would like a couple minutes to confer with me before I take the stand.
We'll take a 5-minute recess, and you may confer with your counsel that we'll talk to you.
Everybody remain seated. The judge is out of the courtroom.
I do.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
Theodore Robert Bundy.
Directing your attention to the early morning of August 15th, 1975, after you'd been stopped by Trooper Hayward, approximately what time of
Did we
morning?
establish that it was really the 16th, or did we? That date,
Judge, there's a discrepancy in the report.
well, it's either the 15th or the 16th. Is there any question about that?
It's not
All right.
right.
As long as we're not hung with one on one day and one on another, that's the only thing the court was worried about. We're talking about one single incident, either August the 15th or August the 16th. Is that correct, gentlemen?
That's correct.
All right. Proceed on.
About what time?
It was early in the morning, approximately 2 o'clock.
After you had been stopped, did Officer Hayward say anything to you?
Well, after the stop had occurred, I exited my car, and the officer, Hayward, had left his car and approached me, and the first thing he said to me was, "Why didn't you get out of your car and run? I could have taken your head off," or words to those effect. Words to that effect.
Did he ask you for your driver's license and registration?
He did. I think he asked me a number of questions which intervened the request for a driver's license, and I think he asked me after his first comment what I was doing in his neighborhood, to which I did not initially make a response. And then he asked me for my driver's license, which I got from the inside of my car.
Did you produce a driver's license?
Yes.
Did you produce a registration?
Yes.
Did Officer Hayward advise you of your rights at that time?
No.
Could you relate to me the circumstances which took place immediately after you were stopped?
After I gave the officer my driver's license, he went back to his vehicle, as I recall, and leaned in and pulled out the microphone that they use for the radios and came back to me and told me to go stand by his car, which was approximately 10 feet in back of my car. He told me to wait there, and there was an officer, another state patrolman, who was already on the scene, and he told me to stay with the officer. He told the officer to keep an eye on me.
Let me back up a little bit. Was Officer Hayward in uniform?
Yes, he was.
Was he carrying a weapon?
Yes, he was.
Was the additional officer who had come to the scene Was he in uniform?
Yes.
Was he carrying a weapon?
Yes.
How many officers arrived at the scene?
Well, they arrived and they left. I'd say that at any one time there were, at the most that were on the scene at any one time, approximately a half a dozen.
Were they all in uniform?
All except for Detective Ondrak, who arrived later, who was in plain clothes.
What was the attitude of the officers towards you?
Well, I testified as to Sergeant Hayward's initial reaction. After he told me to stand by his car, he proceeded to my car and he began to walk around it, shining his flashlight through the windows and peering in through the windows. The officer that I was standing with next to the patrol car began asking me questions, asking me what I was doing in the neighborhood, why I was there, so on and so forth.
Did any of the officers read you any rights, advised you the right to remain silent at that time?
No.
Did anybody advise you of the right to have an attorney present if any questions take place?
No.
Anybody advise you that you have the right not to talk to us?
No.
All right, and then Officer Hayward was looking in the car with a flashlight?
Yes.
And then what happened next?
He walked. As I was standing by the car, watching him and listening to the officer next to me ask me questions. I watched him walk around the car and shine his flashlight in the car. He apparently was focusing on something inside the car for some time, or it seemed like some time. He opened the car door, entered the car, and I couldn't see what he was doing. He came back to me and then repeated his earlier questions about what I was doing in his neighborhood, why I was there, and then, as I recall, he went to make another call on his police radio.
Did Officer Hayward or any other officer at the scene ask you for permission to search the car?
No.
Did you give anyone permission to search the car?
No.
Had you ever been arrested before?
No.
Did anyone tell you that you had a right to refuse to let them search your car?
No.
Do you remember the words being asked to you, whether or not you minded if they looked inside your car?
I can't recall a request to search my car, and the words, whether or not they asked me if they could look at my car, is something I don't recall or construed as a request to search my car.
Do you remember telling any of the officers that they could look at your car?
No.
At any point during this incident, did anyone read you your Miranda rights or tell you your rights?
Yes.
At what point was that?
After Sergeant Hayward had searched my car and called in another officer to come in, and after my car had been thoroughly searched by the other officers, Detective Ondrak approached me at that time and informed me that he was going to seize certain items from my car, and told me that he was going to attempt to get a warrant or a complaint or something of that type against me for possession of burglary tools. At that point, Sergeant Hayward or another officer, I'm not sure, searched me for the first time, handcuffed me, put me in his vehicle, read me the rights off a little card he carried on his console, and drove me downtown to the Salt Lake County Jail.
It was after the search had taken place?
Yes.
And after the items had been seized?
Yes.
Did you tried to stop the search?
No.
Why is that?
Well, I'd say I was afraid to, but that's not exactly the way. I mean, it's not that I was quaking in my shoes. I felt that I couldn't stop them from doing what they were doing, that they were going to go ahead and do it no matter what I did. They were intent. The questions from Sergeant Ondrak and, Sergeant Hayward and the other officers at the scene indicated that they believed that I was involved in some sort of activity, and they were hostile about it. The questions seemed hostile to me, indicated to me that they were going to do damn well what they pleased, and I did not.
You didn't see any point?
There was no point. I didn't see how the heck I could stop a half a dozen uniformed armed officers from searching my car.
They didn't ask you for your consent?
No.
Objection too broad.
Let me ask you to see if do you have anything else?
I think that about covers it.
I have no further questions.
Mr. McKeever?
Thank you, Judge. Just a couple of things. That's not the first thing you told Hayward, though, when he asked you what you were doing in the neighborhood, did he?
What? Excuse me?
He asked you what you were doing in the neighborhood, and you didn't tell him right off what you were doing in the neighborhood, did you?
I told him what. I responded to his question.
I understand. What was that response?
As I recall, the response, I don't know when it occurred, was that I had been in the neighborhood drive-in movie.
Doing what?
I said my response to him was that I had been in the vicinity at a drive-in movie.
And you told him the name of that movie, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
But you hadn't been to that movie, had you?
Your Honor, I think this is relevant.
I'm going to let him answer.
I don't think it's material to the issue.
Well, the question of credibility is always material, and these are questions that the court would be concerned with. I'll let him answer.
No, I hadn't.
Well, you started off with a lie to him. And you followed that up. Let me see if I understand your testimony correctly. You followed that up with another story, didn't you?
Your Honor, Jeff.
But restate the question.
Well, did you tell Hayward anything else after you told him that you'd been at the drive-in movie? You do recall your testimony during the courtroom proceedings in Utah, do you not?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I think really, it's a broad question. If you try to be more specific, I can help you out.
Do you recall your testimony in Utah?
I recall testifying in Utah.
Do you recall the drive-in movie story you told Hayward? You've already testified to that.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall the marijuana story?
Your Honor, I object. Again, understood.
I'm going to rule it that there's some reference to it in the opinion.
Judge, excuse me, that hasn't been talked about by either the officers at this hearing or by testimony of the...
He's on cross-examination and the defendant. We got a direct, pinpointed question of issue of fact that the court has to. And that's, I think, about a question. Overruled, you may proceed.
Do you need me to freshen up your memory a little bit, Mr. Bundy?
I think if you could ask me the question again, I'm not sure what you're asking, but I can try.
I'm asking you kind of an initial question, and I don't mean to be confusing. Do you recall your testimony in Utah? If you don't, say so, and I'll try to refresh you.
Well, if you could give me a specific question, I don't think it would be difficult for me to sit here and quote you verbatim what my testimony was in Utah.
I understand. I can appreciate that. Let me see if this refreshes your mind. You recall testifying that on the evening in question you were eating dinner and watching television until 12 midnight or 12:30, which time you decided to visit a friend. That upon arriving at that friend's house, you noticed the lights were out, you decided not to waken her up, and you proceeded to drive around for a while. You ended up in the Granger area where you decided to smoke some dope.
Your Honor, excuse me, but if he's going to ask me a question, I will object to the summarization of the entire line of questioning. He's going to ask me a question.
Well, if I've sufficiently refreshed your memory, say so, and I'll stop. You want to tell us about that testimony?
Do you recall that, Mr.?
Do I recall the testimony?
You apparently do. You just told the court there was lengthy questions and answers about that point.
All I'm saying is that I don't recall the testimony specifically, but I can say that in general that I can associate what you're saying with the trial in Utah.
Okay. Specifically, do you recall telling the court in Utah that you fled from the officer in order to get the smoke out of your car and that you threw the marijuana out the window during the chase?
Yes.
Now, back to this case. Isn't it a fact that you've done all of the research on this particular motion?
Yes, such as it is. Yes, I have.
Have you found some cases on the point?
I found too many cases.
And the point we're talking about is consent to search, isn't it?
That's one of the points we're talking about.
Are you familiar with what the factual basis would need to be for a consent search to be thrown out?
Yes, I'm familiar with it. I am now. I wasn't then.
That hasn't colored your testimony a bit.
I think you'll find, well, no, it hasn't. And I think you'll find, if you review my testimony in the suppression hearing in Utah, that it's essentially the same.
That's all I have, Judge.
Any further right? Do you have anything further, Mr. Clement?
No, sir, I don't.
You may step down. Any further testimony on the motion?
I feel like I need to call Officer Hayward just briefly, Judge.
All right. Officer Hayward, then. Sergeant, I guess he is now.